Welcome back to Inside the Vatican with America Media. I'm your host, Colleen Dulle, and as always, I am joined by veteran Vatican correspondent Gerard O'Connell. Good morning from New Orleans, Jerry.
Good afternoon from a cold and wet Rome, Colleen.
It's been a while since we've had a sunny Roman day, Jerry.
Yes, we're well into winter.
We are, and we're well into the swing of Christmas activities, or pre-Christmas Advent activities, you could say. So this week on the show, we're going to talk about some recent arts events at the Vatican that have been happening in the run-up to Christmas, and then we'll also talk about the Jubilee of Prisoners, which is the last big event of the Jubilee Year. Jerry, let's start with those Christmas time activities, and wherever possible, we'll let our listeners and viewers in on the action with some clips. So first off, on December 6th, the feast of St. Nicholas, the Vatican hosted its annual Concert for the Poor, and this year it featured Canadian singer Michael Bublé. The concert was in the Vatican's Paul VI Audience Hall, and in one clip that's gone viral, Pope Leo could be seen singing along to LOVE from the audience.
I is for the way you look at me. Is very, very extra.
Jerry, I read that these concerts started in 2015 under Pope Francis, but I don't remember hearing much about them in the last years. So can you tell me a little background on what they are and what, if anything, was different about this one?
Well, Francis started opening up these concerts to the poor people, the homeless people in Rome. Some of them have tents right around St. Peter's Square at night, sleeping bags and such like. And Francis always felt, everybody's having festivities. Let's share the joy with some of the people who don't have televisions or who don't have the possibility. And so he opened these. How many were at this year's concert of poor people? Well, that's a big question.
Are you saying like versus other people?
Yes. I mean, the Pope was present, and of course, his presence attracts a lot of people. Francis usually didn't come to the concerts, but he wanted the poor people to enjoy it. And you remember, he also organized that they could visit the Sistine Chapel, I think, at one stage.
So Leo came personally, and I understand he also had some requests for the set list. Like he was reasonably involved in this. He asked Michael Bublé to sing the Ave Maria, and in probably one of the more, I was going to say one of the more memorable moments for the Vatican press corps this year, but then again, we had a conclave, so maybe not. But Michael Bublé gave a preview of that performance in the Vatican press office.
A little rehearsal then, before I have to go up and sing Ave Maria, gratia plena. That's it.
Right, and he asked him to sing the Ave Maria. And Leo, of course, we know is very musical, and you see him singing at the masses. You see him every opportunity he can. He sings at the ceremonies, and so he obviously enjoyed, and he enjoyed being at it. And so he was at that concert, and then he was at one about a week later with Riccardo Muti, who was being awarded the Ratzinger Prize. Ratzinger had already, as Pope Benedict, given him an award in, I think, 2012, if I remember.
The award that he was given by Benedict was the Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Gregory the Great, and that was given by Pope Benedict in 2012. And for those who don't know, Riccardo Muti is a famous conductor. And so he gave this concert at the Vatican with a youth orchestra he founded, as well as the choir of the Siena Cathedral.
Yes, he was famous for being the conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
He's also been a lot of other places as principal conductor, music director, including the Philharmonia in London, the La Scala in Milan. So he's just super, super well known, has been involved in so many just iconic locations for classical music. What is the Ratzinger Prize, Jerry?
Well, there's a Ratzinger Foundation, which was set up after, even during his lifetime, which brought together some of his writings, gathered all his writings, and also awarded prizes to people who commented on his works or wrote even books on his works. Ratzinger was very impressed by the music of Muti.
And this award is typically presented in Rome by the Pope. Most of the time it goes to theologians or scholars, philosophers, but sometimes it goes to a figure whose work has made a big contribution to theological understanding. And so in this case, that was through music.
Muti was always felt that his music led to the beyond, to the great mystery of the beyond, and that between the different musical intervals, that there was something that was tending in that direction. And
that's a very Ratzinger thought, this idea that like something beautiful leads to what is greater, leads to God.
And that is what I think this prize was given to him for. That he was somehow connecting life, music, to the great beyond, to God. And so it seemed fitting that he would get this prize. And then, of course, Leo, in his speech, he mentioned how Pope Francis talked about how music also led the soul to God. And so it happened at the concert in Rome when he was being awarded this Ratzinger Prize. Muti mentioned that Cardinal Supich was there, and he recalled what he had done in the cathedral in Chicago. And it was a very beautiful thing because he's got together this youth orchestra. And so you had a youth choir from Siena and this youth orchestra, which Muti has been responsible. He's one of the famous Italians of today, along with Benigni. So
yes.
These are some of the great figures of Italian culture and art in today's world.
Jerry, you mentioned Benigni. That brings us right to the next big thing that happened in the Vatican just in the last weeks, which is that on December 10th, Roberto Benigni, who was the director and star of one of Pope Leo's favorite films, La Vita è Bella, Life is Beautiful, he had an audience with Pope Leo, and then he broadcast this 2-hour monologue about St. Peter, which was called Peter, a Man in the Wind, and it was delivered from the Vatican. Here's a clip for our listeners.
Possiamo immaginare l'emozione che lo invade. All'inizio non riesce a parlare, può solo guardarlo, convincerli che è proprio di fronte al suo Signore, al suo Gesù.
Jerry, we didn't hear a lot about this in the States, but it was huge in Italy. It broadcast during prime time on a main Italian TV station with a whopping 4 million viewers and 24% of the rating share for that night. What can you tell us about this program?
Well, it's very interesting because the request for this apparently goes back to Pope Francis, that Pope Francis indirectly asked Benigni if he would do a piece on St. Peter.
Because he's been doing a series of these like TV monologues, right?
He's been doing these monologues. And it's very interesting because Pope Francis, before he was Pope, Benigni went to Argentina. And he did one of these monologues on Dante. And Then Archbishop Bergoglio, Cardinal Bergoglio, went and talked with him afterwards. So he had this 2-hour-long performance inside in the Vatican Gardens. And it was magnificent. He presented, he did this monologue, reflecting on Peter, the first Pope. And he spoke about Peter's relationship with Jesus and Jesus' relationship with Peter, and how Jesus chose this guy who, a fisherman, not educated, who kept failing, going down but getting up again, and who had a great heart. And he mentions, for example, if Peter hadn't denied Jesus, Christianity wouldn't have started, because there would be no Peter.
I listened to some clips from it, and it was really, really beautiful, Jerry. Did you follow it live?
I followed the whole thing live, and it was amazing. I was struck, for example, at the end, he said that Peter had been asked by Jesus 3 times, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" And he said, Peter had said, "Yes, of course I love you." And he said, when he was crucified upside down, he said, when he was hanging upside down, what was going through his head at that point? That was when he was showing that he really loved Jesus. It was very powerful. And you said it hasn't made much impact in the United States. Well, I understand there will be English subtitles, and it will be available.
Oh, good.
And there's also a book just come out on this. So it was really a most extraordinary performance by him. And he said, Benigni said he had reflected, he'd read the Gospels first to try and understand this character, Peter. And then he'd read all the books he could find about Peter. And he said, and I identified with him. Because, I do wrong things. I make mistakes. I fall and I get up again. And it was really a very striking performance.
And Jerry, also this month, it was announced that the American actor Chris Pratt, who starred in the TV show Parks and Recreation and the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, he'll be presenting a documentary about the tomb of St. Peter. And that's being shot inside St. Peter's Basilica right now. And it's set to be released next year for the 400th anniversary of the inauguration and dedication of the Basilica.
Well, if people come to visit the Vatican, I think they should, if they have time, well in advance, book to go to the excavations right down around the tomb of St. Peter. That would be really a very precious moment. Only so many hundred people a day can get down there.
I've never done it, and I really want to.
You have to book a long time in advance, and you can book online, but you cannot just simply turn up and hope, no matter how important you are, that you can get down there.
Jerry, one last kind of pre-Christmas festivity that has gone on in recent days is that the nativity scene and Christmas tree went up in St. Peter's Square.
Yes, and Pope Leo was there for the opening of it. Many, many people come to see the turning on of the lights on the Christmas tree, and to see the unveiling of the crib, as it were. Most people take down the Christmas tree around the 6th of January. But the Vatican has tended in some years to let it there until the end of January. Why? I don't know. But this year, of course, we will have the closing of the Holy Door.
Right, and that brings us to the story that we're going to talk about after our break. We'll talk about the last big event of the Jubilee Year, which was the Jubilee for prisoners and people who work in prisons. Stay with us. Welcome back. This past weekend was the final event of the Jubilee of Hope. It was the Jubilee of prisoners and those who work in prisons. Our listeners might remember that last year, the day after Christmas, Pope Francis opened a holy door at the Rebibbia prison in Rome, and it was only the second holy door to be opened after the one in St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas Eve. So the Jubilee came full circle this weekend. Some 200 inmates from different countries came to a papal mass in St. Peter's Basilica on Gaudete Sunday. Jerry, Pope Leo gave a powerful homily that we ran the full text of in America. Tell us about it.
He recalled how on the 26th of December, Pope Francis went to Rebibbia prison and for the first time ever opened the Holy Door in a prison. And he invited everyone, and I quote, "I say two things to you," he was saying to the prisoners and to the staff there, but especially to the prisoners. First, the rope in hand with the anchor of hope. In other words, that the anchor is anchored in heaven and you have a rope and you hold on to it. And then the second thing, open wide the doors of your heart. Because in prison, the climate sometimes forces people to close their hearts. And it was a very powerful image. And Leo recalled this. And he said he was inviting us to keep alive our faith in the life to come and always to believe in the possibility of a better future. And then Leo went on a very powerful homily saying, that prison really is meant, okay, you pay your penalty for the wrong you've done, but also it's meant to rehabilitate you and enable you to restart life. And this American prisoner who gave an interview to Vatican media said how when prisoners come out, they feel a stigma. They feel that society is excluding them.
Well, this is certainly a problem in the United States, is that many job applications have a checkbox for whether you've ever been convicted of a felony. And if you check that box, you don't get a job.
Yeah, and you remember some time back, I wrote an article, and I think we discussed it here on the podcast, about the chef Abate in Chicago, who trains people in Cook County Prison. He trains them to be cooks, and over many, many years, he's trained hundreds of people, and they come out and they get a job because they have a qualification as a cook. And so Leo was also on this kind of line.
Yeah, he talked about the importance of education and job opportunities for people who have been incarcerated or who are currently incarcerated.
Because society is very cruel, and this is the reality, that once you've fallen on the wrong side, you are excluded. And it's very difficult to re-enter or to rehabilitate yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Jerry, it reminds me a bit of what you were just saying about Benigni and his reflection on St. Peter, right? The fact that, Peter fell and then he got up and people had to let him.
Well, Jesus was a prisoner, and Peter was a prisoner, and Paul was a prisoner. They were all prisoners. Some of the early popes were prisoners. And so, and we have a long history in the Christianity of those who have ended up in prison for their faith yesterday. Certainly. And still today. Mm-hmm. In China, you have some bishops who we don't know where they are. But so anyway, Leo was saying he was calling on everybody, those who are responsible for running the system and people in the prison, to kind of look towards, to have some hope. This is the Jubilee of Hope. And he called especially the obligation to promote in every place a society established on new criteria and ultimately on charity, on love. Of course, that's not what the new criteria is that is driving the prison system today. Certainly not. And it's very interesting that in Benigni, and I go back to him, in this talk in this monologue on Peter, he said that Christ, the real revolution that he brought was that you love your enemy. He said that this is the real revolution, the revolution of love. And so there is so much richness that comes out of the homilies, of these artistic events. It offers a lot of rich fare, especially at a time when we are faced with so much shooting and killing in different parts of the world, in Australia and Brown University, not to mention in the Holy Land and in Ukraine. And so it's keeping hope alive in the midst of such misery, you know.
Jerry, I was interested that in this very powerful homily, Leo didn't mention the death penalty, even though that's something that Catholics are really at the forefront of pushing for an end to in many places. Now, Vatican News did run a piece by Chrisanne Villancourt-Murphy from the Catholic Mobilizing Network that works against the death penalty in the U.S. She also wrote a recent article for America magazine called "Executions Nearly Doubled in 2025, but the Jubilee Year Saw Other Good News for Death Penalty Abolition." So we'll link to that in the show notes. But is there a reason you think that he didn't mention the death penalty?
Look, Colleen, in the writing of these speeches, there are so many things to put in. Certainly the Church has been very clear, and certainly under Francis, and I think also even recently under Leo, there's no doubt what the Church's position is. The death penalty should be eliminated.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, this speech did touch on a lot of issues, including the problem of overcrowding in prisons, right? So it was quite wide-ranging.
Well, it has quite a shopping list, if you wish, of things that need to be corrected in the prison. And there's state prisons, and then there are prisons which are given to private groups to run.
Yes, many in the United States.
And this is where things get even worse.
Right, because there's a profit motive to incarcerate more people.
Yeah. And so he says, and I quote, he says, "There are many problems to be addressed. Here we can mention overcrowding, insufficient commitment to guarantee stable educational programs for rehabilitation and job opportunities. And on a more personal level, let us not forget the weight of the past, the wounds to be healed in body and spirit, the disappointments, the infinite patience that is needed with oneself and others when embarking on the paths of conversion, and the temptation to give up and to no longer forgive." And here he's hinting at, you know, the suicides that happen in prison. And that's a reality too. We've had quite a lot here in Italy in this year. People lose hope. They just crack at a certain point. And society is not very merciful.
Jerry, on the point of mercy, Leo also reiterated Francis's call for, quote, forms of amnesty or pardon meant to help individuals regain confidence in themselves and in society. This was from the Bull of Indiction for this Jubilee year. And, you know, this is kind of a traditional thing with Jubilees historically, is that there comes with them a call to release prisoners and captives. I did some looking into the history of this just because I was interested. And it looks like John Paul II in 2000 made a similar call, but it wasn't taken up super widely. The only big implementation of this was in Bolivia, and there were a lot of issues with how it was implemented, but it ended up approving 3,000 inmates to be released. So I don't know, have you heard anything about this being taken up during this Jubilee year?
Well, apparently in Spain, some have been released. The figures are not very clear. And governments are reluctant because they're dealing with public opinion. And so here is a question also of the role of media to convince the people that, you know, those in prison too are human beings and they have a right to a second chance.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so I think it's a great thing that the Church, as the last big event of the Jubilee year, has actually chosen to focus on prisoners and the prison system and the calling for a new way of dealing with this, of approaching this, that offers hope to those who have fallen short of the standards of society.
Absolutely, because what is the Christian message if not forgiveness? All right, Jerry, if our listeners want to read more about this, you can find Chrisanne Villancourt-Murphy's piece that we ran in America magazine, along with the full homily that Pope Leo gave. Those are all linked in our show notes as well. Jerry, I wanted to cover a few brief news stories before we go. First off, while leaving Castel Gandolfo last week, so shortly after we recorded, Pope Leo responded to a question from an Italian journalist about why he appeared not to pray at the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. I know you and I discussed this a bit, and you said somebody will have to ask him whether he prayed or not. And so now it's been done. But in response, Leo referred again to this book, The Practice of the Presence of God, that he had mentioned on the plane, and alluding to that said, I could be praying right now. But then he said there is, quote, a style of prayer in that time and place, and that he prefers to pray in a Catholic church in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. What do you make of all this?
Well, he said two things. He said, who says I didn't pray?
Mm-hmm. Well, he said they said I didn't pray, but didn't specify they.
Yeah, he said that was curious. And I think, people pray in different ways. And he mentioned this book. In fact, I've actually bought this book. It's about 70 pages.
You and every other Vatican reporter.
Probably. And but it raises the question, what is prayer? In the original discussion we had, I always emphasized that for Muslims, the important thing was the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church, took off his shoes, went in, respected, and went into the mosque where Muslims pray.
Yeah, and in fact, even since making this comment that he prefers to pray in a Catholic church, I haven't seen anyone in the Muslim world taking issue with it. I haven't seen any press reports or even social media comments about it.
Nor have I, but that doesn't mean, you've got bloggers of all kinds who
certainly
interpreted everything in any way they choose.
But this comment that he prefers to pray in a Catholic church did feel like a big change from, I couldn't imagine Pope Francis saying that. Even Pope Benedict went and prayed in this mosque. I mean, do you think this represents a change in the way that Leo will approach Islam?
I don't think at all that he's changed the approach to Islam. I have spoken to the judge who was the advisor of the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, who's the top Sunni Muslim authority.
Mm-hmm. And who was a good friend of Pope Francis.
Representing 85% of the Muslims in the world. And Leo has spoken to him by phone. And they have agreed that they will continue the path of Francis in the dialogue. So there is absolutely no indication. On the contrary, there's some positive evidence that Leo intends to continue on the path of Francis. And he has said that his next trip will be to Algeria. Now, Algeria is a Muslim country. The first country he went to was a Muslim country. Turkey, a secular state, but 97, 99% Muslim. And so anybody who suggests or claims that Leo is changing the relationship with Islam really better go back and read what was said and understand what has been communicated.
Well, I don't think the question is whether the dialogue is ceasing. I think it's that this looks a little different. It's a different kind of image than we've had in the past.
Each pope has his own style, his own way of doing things. Francis went into that Blue Mosque and said, I remember saying in the past here, he said, we praise God with words, but we must adore him. And here we adore him. And then one has to understand that it is the one God that Muslims adore as Christians adore. It's the one God.
If our listeners want to read more about this, I wrote a brief piece on Pope Leo's comments that we can link to in the show notes. Jerry, one last thing for this week, and this is related to the violence that you mentioned when we were talking about the Jubilee of Prisons, but Pope Leo sent a message of condolence to the Archbishop of Sydney following the shooting at a Hanukkah celebration near Sydney's Bondi Beach that killed 16 people, including a 10-year-old girl and a Holocaust survivor. The following day, Leo said, "Enough with these forms of anti-Semitic violence. We must eliminate hatred from our hearts."
Yes, this problem of the spread of hatred. We've talked about it a lot when we talked about the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. We talked about it in Gaza, where the hatred is just exponentially growing. And how do you stop hatred? We will have the message on this Thursday, 18th of December. The message for the World Day of Peace is disarming.
And disarmed and disarming.
Yeah. And one of the things, how you disarm the language of people.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the language that stirs up the hatred. And how you undo that language so that hatred does not increase. And in fact, remember, you were there as well, when Pope Leo met the journalists for the first time, he spoke about the language that's used and the responsibility of journalists to disarm the language. In the midst of this terrible violence against unarmed civilians, you had this extraordinary example of an unarmed man tackling and disarming one of the two killers. And he has become a hero in the country, and rightly so, because he risked his own life to save the life of others, which is the maximum of Christian love. And he is a Muslim.
All right, Jerry. That ends us on a beautiful note for Christmas. I feel like this week we've been talking a lot about just these central Christian messages of self-sacrifice and love and forgiveness. So I can't think of a better place to leave our show than that. Next week, you're going to be out, so we'll have one more episode of this season before we take our Christmas break. But it's my last show with you for the year. So, Jerry, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for this incredible year of Inside the Vatican, and I look forward to next year.
Well, happy Christmas to all our listeners, and look forward to connecting again in the new year.
And one last big piece of news, Bishop Ronald Hicks has been appointed the new Archbishop of New York City. He is currently the Bishop of Joliet, Illinois. He's been there since 2020. He was installed in 2021. He's 58 years old. He's from the Diocese of Joliet, and he has worked in pastoral and missionary ministries in Mexico and El Salvador. And he's known for a pastoral style of listening, simplicity, working with the poor and migrants. So if our listeners want to learn more about Bishop Hicks and this appointment, we have coverage at americamagazine.org, and we'll link to it in the show notes. Inside the Vatican is produced by Riccardo Silva and me. Audio engineering by Kevin Christopher Robles. Production assistance from Will Galtieri. Our executive producer is Sebastian Gomes. You can find all of our Vatican coverage and subscribe at americamagazine.org. For America Media with Gerard O'Connell, I'm Colleen Dulle. We'll see you next time.